You people are all the sake, always looking for a handout.
Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?
What happens when a wealthy racist decides to turn a young black waitress into his evening's entertainment? You won't believe how this story unfolds, and the ending will leave you speechless. It was 8:47 p.m. on a Friday night at the Golden Oak, one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants. Glittering crystal chandeliers bathed marble floors in warm golden light, while the soft murmur of sophisticated conversations filled the air. This wasn't just any restaurant. It was where Georgia's elite came to see and be seen, where one dinner tab could eclipse a working family's monthly grocery budget. Maya Johnson moved gracefully between tables, her black uniform pressed to perfection, carrying herself with quiet dignity, despite the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders. At 23, she had the kind of natural beauty that couldn't be hidden by long work shifts or cheap uniforms. High cheekbones, expressive dark eyes, and a smile that could light up a room when she allowed herself to truly use it. But tonight, Maya kept that smile carefully guarded. She'd learned to be careful about being too friendly with certain customers. In her 2 years working at the Golden Oak, she'd encountered enough entitled patrons to know that some mistook her kindness for weakness, her warmth for vulnerability. Maya hadn't always dreamed of serving tables to wealthy strangers. Growing up in a small apartment in East Atlanta, she'd spent her childhood years at an old upright piano her grandmother had saved for months to buy. While neighborhood children chased games in the street, Maya found her sanctuary in those weathered black and white keys. Her grandmother, a woman who'd cleaned houses for 50 years to make ends meet, would sit beside her every evening, humming along as Maya taught herself to play. "Music don't see color, baby girl," her grandmother used to say. "When you play, you speak a language everybody understands, whether they want to admit it or not." Maya had gotten a partial scholarship to study music at Spelman College, but when her grandmother's health collapsed during her sophomore year, Maya made the soul-crushing decision to drop out and work full-time to help with medical bills. The Golden Oak paid better than most restaurants, even if it came with its own unique challenges. Tonight felt different from the moment she'd clocked in. There was an electricity in the air, the kind that made her stomach flutter with unease. She'd already dealt with 2 difficult tables, one couple who'd sent back their perfectly prepared salmon claiming it was too fishy, and a businessman who'd made inappropriate comments about her appearance while his wife looked the other way. But the real test of her evening was about to walk through those glass doors. At 9:15 p.m., Richard Whitmore made his entrance. You couldn't miss him, even if you tried. At 45, he moved through the world with the practiced arrogance of generational wealth and unchecked privilege. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His Italian suit probably cost more than Maya's car, and he wore success like a weapon designed to intimidate everyone around him. Richard wasn't just wealthy. He was old Atlanta money, the kind of man who sat on charity boards by day and made racist jokes at country club dinners by night. He'd built his empire on the sweat and suffering of exploited black laborers, a family history that Richard wore like a badge of honor rather than shame. Tonight, he wasn't alone. 3 other men accompanied him, all cut from the same cloth. Middle-aged, wealthy, white, and radiating the kind of casual entitlement that made service workers' lives miserable. They were the type who viewed restaurants like their personal entertainment venues, where staff existed solely for their amusement. Maya watched from across the room as the hostess seated them at table 12, one of the premium spots near the restaurant's beautiful grand piano. That piano had always been her favorite part of the Golden Oaks decor, a stunning black Steinway that gleamed under the soft lighting. Sometimes, during slow moments, she'd find herself staring at it, imagining what it would feel like to play something so magnificent. She'd never touched it, of course. It was purely decorative, placed there to add an air of sophistication to the dining experience. The restaurant occasionally hired professional pianists for special events, but on regular nights like this, it sat silent and untouched. "Maya, you've got table 12, called James, the floor manager, pulling her from her thoughts. Her heart sank slightly. Richard Whitmore's name circulated among staff like a warning. He was known for being demanding, condescending, and particularly harsh with Black employees. Some of the other servers had learned to avoid his tables entirely, claiming sudden illnesses or taking extended breaks whenever he arrived. But Maya had bills to pay, pride to maintain, and dreams that refused to die. She straightened her shoulders, grabbed her notepad, and walked toward the table with measured steps. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Golden Oak. I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice was professional, warm, but not overly familiar. Richard looked up from his menu, and Maya felt his eyes scan her from head to toe in a way that made her skin crawl. It wasn't attraction, it was assessment, like she was livestock at auction. "Maya," he repeated slowly, drawing out each syllable. "That's an interesting name, very exotic." His companions chuckled, and Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. She recognized the tone immediately, the fake politeness that barely concealed something much uglier underneath. "Can I start you gentlemen with some drinks this evening?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Bring us your finest scotch," Richard said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "The expensive stuff. I'm sure a place like this knows how to treat customers who actually matter." The implication was clear, and Maya felt it like a slap across her face. But she'd dealt with worse. She nodded politely and turned to walk toward the bar. "Oh, Maya," Richard called out, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Make sure you bring the good glasses. Not whatever you people usually drink from." The words hit their mark. You people. Maya's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but she kept moving with measured grace. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't let nobody make you forget who you are, baby girl. Their hate says more about them than it ever could about you." But Richard Whitmore was just getting started. As Maya returned with their drinks, she could hear Richard regaling his companions with stories that grew progressively more offensive. He wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. Racist jokes that drew snickers, stories dripping with contempt about those people, comments about how some folks had forgotten their place. Other diners were starting to notice. Maya could see the discomfort on their faces, the way some people shifted in their seats or exchanged worried glances. But no one said anything. This was Richard Whitmore, after all. He donated millions to political campaigns and sat on the boards of half the city's most prestigious institutions. Who was going to call him out? "You know what I love about places like this?" Richard said as Maya set down his scotch. "They understand proper service, not like some of these other establishments where they hire just anyone off the street." His eyes locked with Maya's as he said it, the message crystal clear. She was just anyone off the street to him, disposable, worthless, beneath his notice except as a target for his entertainment. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she finished distributing the drinks, but she managed to keep her composure. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes to look at the menu?" "Oh, we'll need some time," Richard said dismissively. "Why don't you go attend to whatever it is you people do when you're not serving your betters?" The words hung in the air like poison. Maya felt every eye in the nearby tables turn toward her, waiting to see how she'd respond. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few showed the same casual indifference that allowed men like Richard to operate with impunity. "Of course, sir. I'll be back in a few minutes to take your order," Maya said, her voice barely betraying the storm raging inside her chest. As she walked away, she could hear Richard's laughter mixing with his companions, the sound following her across the dining room like a pack of hyenas celebrating a kill. She ducked into the employee restroom and stared at herself in the mirror, fighting back tears of frustration and rage. This was Maya's daily battlefield. This was what she endured night after night to pay her bills and help her family. Men like Richard Whitmore saw her as entertainment, a punching bag for their prejudices, someone they could demean and dismiss without consequence. But as Maya stared at her reflection, she saw something else too. She saw her grandmother's eyes staring back at her, full of strength and dignity. She saw 23 years of resilience, of rising above circumstances that would have broken weaker people. She saw a woman carrying dreams too magnificent for these marble walls to contain. She splashed cold water on her face, straightened her uniform, and walked back onto the floor. Whatever Richard had planned for her tonight, she would face it with the dignity her grandmother had taught her, unbroken, unbowed. She had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would change. The dining room felt different when Maya returned. The energy had shifted, becoming more tense and charged. Other servers shot her sympathetic glances as she passed, and she could tell that word was spreading about Richard's behavior. The Golden Oak prided itself on maintaining a sophisticated atmosphere, but Richard's loud commentary was turning the elegant restaurant into something that felt more like a gladiator arena. Maya approached the table with steady steps, her notepad ready. "Have you gentlemen decided on your orders?" Richard looked up with a predatory smile that made her stomach turn. "You know, Maya, I've been thinking about you while you were gone." His tone was casual, conversational, but Maya could sense the malice underneath. This was a man who enjoyed power, who fed off the discomfort of others, especially those he viewed as inferior. "I've been wondering," Richard continued, loud enough for several nearby tables to hear, "what exactly qualified you to work at an establishment like this? I mean, this isn't exactly the kind of place where you'd expect to find your kind of people." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Even the ambient noise of conversation and clinking silverware seemed to fade as Richard's words settled over the room like a toxic cloud. "Sir, I'm here to take your food order," Maya replied evenly. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" But Richard wasn't done with his performance. "Oh, I'm sure you have all sorts of special talents," he said, his companion snickering at his crude implication. "Tell me, what did you do before you ended up here?" "Let me guess, fast food, or maybe something even more basic?" Maya's hands clenched around her notepad, but her voice remained steady. "I attended Spelman College before working here, sir." "Now, about your order." "Spelman," Richard interrupted with exaggerated surprise. "Well, well. An educated one. How progressive." He made the word sound like an insult. "I bet you studied something practical, right? Not some useless liberal arts nonsense?" "I studied music," Maya said quietly, immediately regretting the admission. Richard's eyes lit up like he'd struck gold. "Music! Of course, I should have known." He gestured toward the grand piano in the corner with theatrical flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a musician in our midst." His voice had risen enough that most of the restaurant was now paying attention. Maya felt her cheeks burn as dozens of eyes turned toward their table. "Tell me, Maya," Richard said, savoring every word like fine wine. "Can you actually play that beautiful instrument over there? Or was your education just another one of those diversity programs?" The insult was designed to cut deep, and it did. Maya had earned her place at Spelman through talent and hard work, not through any program or special consideration. Her partial scholarship had been merit-based, awarded to the top young pianists in the state. But Richard was painting her achievement as charity, something unearned and illegitimate. "I can play," Maya said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "She can play," Richard announced to the room, as if sharing wonderful news with dear friends. "How absolutely delightful. You know what, Maya? I think you should give us a little demonstration." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge, and Maya felt the weight of every stare in the restaurant. She could see the mix of emotions on people's faces. Some looked uncomfortable with Richard's behavior, others seemed curious about what would happen next, and a few appeared to be enjoying the spectacle. "I'm working, sir," Maya said carefully. "I need to take your orders and serve my other tables." "Oh, nonsense," Richard waved dismissively. "I'm sure your manager wouldn't mind. After all, customer satisfaction is the top priority, isn't it? And I would be very satisfied to see what my money is paying for when I eat at establishments that employ such diverse talent." The way he said diverse made it sound dirty, like something shameful. Maya could feel her anger building, hot and dangerous in her chest. This man wasn't just being rude, he was systematically trying to humiliate her, to reduce her to a caricature for his entertainment. "Please, sir, I really need to," Maya began. "I insist," Richard cut her off, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Surely someone who went to college isn't afraid of a little performance? Unless, of course, you can't actually play and you've been embellishing your qualifications." The accusation was clear. He was calling her a liar, suggesting she'd fabricated her education and abilities. It was one thing to mock her race or her job, but attacking her integrity and the memory of her grandmother's sacrifices felt like crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. Maya looked around the restaurant. Some diners had stopped eating entirely, transfixed by the drama unfolding at table 12. Others were whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable but unsure whether to intervene. Her fellow servers stood frozen, wanting to help but afraid of losing their own jobs if they confronted a customer like Richard Whitmore. "What's it going to be, Maya?" Richard asked, leaning back in his chair with supreme confidence. "Are you going to show us what you can do, or are you going to admit that maybe you're not quite as qualified as you pretended to be?" In that moment, Maya felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every Black woman who'd ever been made to feel small, every person who'd been told they didn't belong, every dream that had been dismissed because of the color of someone's skin. She thought about her grandmother, who'd cleaned houses for wealthy white families while dreaming of a better life for her granddaughter. She thought about the countless hours she'd spent at that old piano, developing the talent that Richard was now mocking. She thought about the scholarship she'd earned, the recognition she'd received, the music that lived in her soul despite everything life had thrown at her. Maya straightened her shoulders and looked Richard directly in the eye. "You want me to play?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fire burning in her chest. "Oh, yes," Richard said, practically rubbing his hands together with glee. "I think everyone here would love to see what kind of entertainment their service fees are supporting." Maya nodded once, a decision crystallizing in her mind. She was going to play, but not for Richard's amusement, not as his performing monkey, not to satisfy his racist assumptions about her abilities. She was going to play to remind everyone in that room, including herself, exactly who she was. Fine, Maya said, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. I'll play. As she walked toward the piano, every step felt like a march toward destiny, each step carrying the crushing weight of fear and the fire of defiance. She could feel the weight of history on her shoulders, the expectations and prejudices of everyone watching, the hopes and dreams of everyone who'd ever been told they weren't good enough. Richard leaned back in his chair, radiating smug satisfaction, like a predator who'd cornered his prey, as though he had already won whatever game he was playing. But most of all, she could feel her grandmother's presence beside her, whispering the words that had guided her through every challenge. Music don't see color, baby girl. When you play, you speak a language everybody understands. It was time to make them all understand. Maya's heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the grand piano, each step echoing through the now silent restaurant like a countdown to Judgment Day. The Steinway gleamed under the soft chandelier light, its polished black surface reflecting the faces of every person watching her walk toward what Richard Whitmore clearly expected to be her humiliation. But Maya wasn't walking toward defeat. She was walking toward destiny. Behind her, she could hear Richard's smug whisper to his companions. This is going to be entertaining. I bet she can barely play chopsticks. His friends chuckled quietly, already savoring what they assumed would be Maya's embarrassment. The restaurant had fallen into cathedral silence, their trivial chatter dissolving into reverent stillness. Silverware stopped clinking, conversations ceased mid-sentence, and even the background music from the sound system seemed to fade away. Every eye in the golden oak was fixed on the young black waitress walking toward the piano that had never been touched by staff, only by professional musicians hired for special occasions. Maya reached the piano bench and paused, feeling their smooth, cold surface, a stark contrast to her burning hands as she looked down at the keys. This wasn't just any piano. This was a concert-quality Steinway worth more than she'd make in 5 years of serving tables. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, the woman Richard saw as unworthy of respect, was about to touch something more valuable than anything he was wearing. She pulled out the bench with careful precision, the legs scraping softly against the floor. As she sat down, Maya could feel the weight of 3 generations of dreams settling on her shoulders. Her great-grandmother, who'd picked cotton in fields owned by men who looked just like Richard. Her grandmother, who'd cleaned the houses of wealthy white families while humming spirituals under her breath. And now Maya, sitting at a grand piano in one of Atlanta's most exclusive restaurants, about to prove that talent and dignity couldn't be diminished by anyone's prejudice. Take your time, sweetheart, Richard called out mockingly. We're all waiting to be impressed. Maya's fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. Sunday mornings at her grandmother's house. The old upright piano that was missing 3 keys, but still sang when she played it. Her grandmother's weathered hands guiding her small fingers across the keyboard, teaching her that music was more than notes. It was soul, it was story, it was the language that spoke when words failed. What you gonna play for us, baby girl? She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Play something that tells them who you really are. Maya opened her eyes, placed her hands on the keys, and began. The first notes emerged like whispered prayers, soft, hesitant, trembling with vulnerability. Not because she was uncertain, but because she was building something. She started with a gentle melody, something that drew people in rather than overwhelming them. It was a technique she'd learned years ago. Start quiet, make them lean forward, make them want to hear more. She began with a piece she'd written herself during her sophomore year at Spelman, a composition she'd called Grandmother's Hands. It started simple, almost like a lullaby, but Maya knew where it was going. She knew how it would build, how it would soar, how each chord would become a chapter of her untold story. The melody flowed through the restaurant like water finding its path, gentle but persistent. Maya could feel the energy in the room shifting. The mocking tension that Richard had created was being replaced by something else. Attention, curiosity, and the first stirrings of recognition that something special might be happening. But Maya was just getting started. As the opening theme established itself, she began to add complexity. Her left hand found a rich, rolling bass line, while her right hand danced through increasingly intricate variations on the melody. This wasn't the simple tune Richard had expected. This was sophisticated, nuanced composition that demonstrated years of training and natural talent. The music began to swell, and Maya let herself get lost in it. This was what she'd missed most about leaving college, not just playing the piano, but feeling the music flow through her, becoming a channel for something larger than herself. Every emotion she'd bottled up over the past 2 years of serving dismissive customers, every frustration with her circumstances, every dream she'd been forced to defer, it all poured into the music. She could hear her grandmother's voice guiding her, "Don't just play the notes, baby girl. Tell them your story. Make them feel what you feel." And Maya did exactly that. The composition moved through different movements, each one representing a different aspect of her journey. The first movement was childhood innocence, the simple joy of discovering music. The second movement introduced struggle, minor keys and discordant notes that represented hardship, loss, and the weight of responsibility that had forced her to leave school. But then came the third movement, and this was where Maya truly let loose. Her fingers danced across the keys, summoning emotions so raw they seemed to bleed into the air, weaving together classical technique with jazz improvisation and gospel influences that spoke to her roots. The music soared through the restaurant, filling every corner with sound so rich and complex that it seemed impossible it was coming from just one person. Richard's smirk had crumbled, replaced by naked shock and something that looked like fear. His mouth hung slightly open as he watched Maya's hands move across the keyboard with the kind of technical mastery that couldn't be faked. This wasn't some amateur stumbling through a simple tune, this was virtuosity, pure and undeniable. Around the restaurant, diners had stopped pretending to eat. Servers stood frozen in place, some with tears in their eyes as Maya's music washed over them. The hostess had abandoned her station to move closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of the performance. Maya was no longer aware of any of them. She was in the zone that every true musician knows, that place where technique and emotion merge into something transcendent. Her composition had moved into its final movement, a triumphant declaration that wove together all the previous themes into something bigger, bolder, more beautiful than the sum of its parts. This movement was about resilience. It was about finding strength in the face of adversity. It was about every person who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough, and had proven those people wrong, not through anger or bitterness, but through the sheer power of their gifts. The music built to a crescendo that seemed to lift the very walls of the restaurant. Maya's entire body was engaged now, her shoulders moving with the rhythm, her face reflecting the joy and pain and hope that flowed through the composition. She was no longer Maya the waitress, Maya the college dropout, Maya the target of Richard's racism. She was Maya the artist, Maya the storyteller, Maya the young woman who carried the dreams of her ancestors in her fingertips. When the final note rang out, the room held its breath as if afraid to break the spell, hanging in the air like a benediction. Maya's hands remained poised over the keys as the last echoes faded into perfect silence. For a moment no one moved, No one breathed. The entire restaurant was frozen in a moment of collective awe. Then the applause began. It started with a single person, an elderly black woman sitting near the windows, tears streaming down her cheeks as she clapped with fierce pride. Then her table joined in, then the table next to them, then the servers, then the kitchen staff who had emerged from the back to see what was happening. Within seconds, the entire restaurant exploded into applause, a thunderous eruption that shook the crystal chandeliers. Diners leaped to their feet, applauding with religious fervor that sent tears streaming down Maya's cheeks. The sound was overwhelming, a standing ovation that went on and on as Maya sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response. But not everyone was applauding. Richard Whitmore remained seated. His trademark smirk had vanished completely, his face a mask of shock, and something else, something that looked almost like fear. His carefully constructed worldview, his assumptions about who belonged where and who was capable of what, had just been demolished by a young black waitress who possessed more talent in her little finger than he had in his entire privileged body. His companions were clapping uncertainly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unable to deny what they just witnessed. They kept glancing at Richard, waiting for his cue, unsure how to react when their leader's racist expectations had been so thoroughly shattered. Maya slowly stood from the piano bench, her legs shaky from the adrenaline and emotion. She looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strange, all united in their appreciation for what had just happened. She saw pride, amazement, respect, and something else that was even more precious: recognition. These people saw her now, not as a waitress, not as part of the background, not as someone to be dismissed or mocked. They saw her as an artist, a human being with extraordinary gifts who deserved their respect and admiration. But Maya's eyes inevitably found their way back to table 12, where Richard sat in stunned silence. She could see the war playing out on his face, his ingrained prejudices battling against the undeniable evidence of what he just witnessed. The applause was finally beginning to die down, and Maya knew she had to say something. This moment was too important, too powerful, to let slip away without acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the restaurant despite not being amplified. "Music has always been my first language, the way I express what words can't capture." She paused, looking directly at Richard as she continued. "My grandmother taught me that music doesn't see color, doesn't care about your background or your bank account. Music only cares about truth. The truth in your heart, the truth in your story, the truth in your soul." The words hit Richard like physical blows. Maya could see him struggling to maintain his composure, his racist assumptions crumbling in the face of her dignity and grace. "I want to thank everyone here for listening," Maya continued, addressing the entire restaurant now, "not just to my music, but to the story it tells. It's the story of every person who's ever been underestimated, every dream that's been dismissed, every talent that's been overlooked because of prejudice or assumption." The crowd hung on every word, many nodding in recognition and understanding. "But mostly," Maya said, her voice growing stronger with each sentence, "it's the story of resilience. It's about rising above other people's limitations and showing the world who you really are." As Maya walked back toward table 12, the crowd began to disperse, returning to their meals with animated conversations about what they'd just witnessed. But the energy in the restaurant had fundamentally changed. The air of casual superiority that places like the Golden Oak often carried had been replaced by something more genuine, more human. Richard was staring down at his hands when Maya approached his table, unable or unwilling to meet her eyes. His companions looked equally uncomfortable, their earlier bravado completely deflated. "Gentlemen," Maya said, her voice professional, but carrying an undertone of quiet strength, "are you ready to order now?" The question hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Richard looked up slowly, and Maya could see something broken in his expression. His racist performance had backfired spectacularly, exposing him not as superior but as small, petty, and fundamentally wrong about everything he thought he knew. "That was unexpected," he managed, his laugh brittle and hollow. For perhaps the first time in his privileged life, he was at a loss for words. One of his companions, a man who'd been laughing at Richard's earlier jokes, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That was extraordinary," he said quietly to Maya. "Truly extraordinary." "I had no idea. Most people don't," Maya replied simply. "That's the point." She looked back at Richard, who was still struggling to find words. "So about your order?" Richard's hands were shaking slightly as he picked up his menu. The man who'd entered the restaurant like a conquering king was now revealed as exactly what he was: a small, insecure person who used racism and privilege to make himself feel powerful because he had nothing genuine to offer the world. Just bring me whatever you recommend," he said through gritted teeth, his voice barely audible. It was surrender, and everyone at the table knew it. Maya nodded professionally. "I'll bring you our signature dish. I think you'll find it quite satisfying." As she walked away to place their order, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete, unshakable confidence in who she was and what she was capable of. Richard Whitmore had tried to diminish her, to make her feel small and worthless. Instead, he'd given her a platform to shine brighter than she'd ever shined before. She had reclaimed not just her voice, but her power, and no amount of racist condescension could steal it back. But the story wasn't over yet. Maya had proven her talent, reclaimed her dignity, and earned the respect of everyone in the restaurant. Now she had to figure out what to do with this moment, how to turn it into something that would last beyond tonight. Because sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you a chance to change everything. And Maya Johnson was beginning to realize that this might just be hers. Word of her performance spread through the Golden Oak like lightning through water, with servers, kitchen staff, and even management buzzing about what had happened at table 12. But Maya tried to keep her focus on her job, serving her remaining tables with the same professionalism she'd always shown, even as her mind struggled to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. Richard and his companions had become subdued to the point of silence. They ate their meals without their earlier bravado, occasionally glancing in Maya's direction with expressions ranging from embarrassment to something that might have been respect. Richard sat in stunned silence, mechanically dissecting his steak as if it held answers to questions he couldn't formulate. But Maya wasn't thinking about Richard anymore. Her mind was on the faces in that crowd, the way they'd looked at her during and after her performance. She'd witnessed something profound, the moment when invisible became undeniable, when servant became artist. For years, she'd felt invisible in places like this, seen only as a function rather than a person. Tonight had changed that in ways she was only beginning to understand. As the evening wound down, other diners continued to approach her when she passed by their tables. A well-dressed couple stopped her to say they'd been moved to tears by her performance. A business executive asked if she gave private lessons for his daughter. An older gentleman pressed his business card into her hand, explaining that he worked with a local music foundation that helped talented young artists. "You have a gift," he told her earnestly. "Don't let it go to waste." Each interaction felt surreal. These were the types of people who usually looked through her, who saw her uniform before they saw her face. Now they were treating her like the accomplished musician she'd always been inside, but had rarely been allowed to express. Around 10:30 p.m., as Maya was clearing one of her final tables, she noticed a woman sitting alone near the piano. The woman was perhaps 60, elegantly dressed, with silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob. She'd been there during Maya's performance, and Maya remembered seeing tears in her eyes during the standing ovation. As Maya passed by, the woman gently touched her arm. "Excuse me, dear. I'm Margaret Chen. I was wondering if I might have a word with you when you finish your shift." Maya paused, studying the woman's face. Her expression carried the warmth of recognition. One artist identifying another, different from the curiosity of the other patrons who'd approached her. "Of course," Maya replied. "I should be done in about 20 minutes. Margaret smiled. "Perfect. I'll wait." Maya finished her remaining tasks with growing curiosity about what Margaret wanted to discuss. She'd learned to be cautious about strangers making promises or offers, but something about Margaret felt different, more substantial, more real than the casual compliments she'd been receiving all evening. At 11 p.m., Maya clocked out and approached Margaret's table. Up close, she could see that the woman's jewelry was understated but expensive, her clothes clearly tailored rather than off the rack. This was someone with means, but also someone who carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from achievement rather than inheritance. "Thank you for waiting," Maya said, sliding into the chair across from her. "You wanted to speak with me?" Margaret's eyes lit up with warmth. "My dear, what you did tonight was extraordinary. I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years, and I've never witnessed anything quite like that performance." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you. I didn't expect any of this when I sat down at that piano." "I imagine not," Margaret said with a knowing smile. "Sometimes the most powerful moments are the ones we don't plan for. Tell me, where did you study? Your technique is remarkable, but there's something more, a depth of expression that can't be taught." Maya found herself opening up to the stranger in a way that surprised her. She told Margaret about her childhood with her grandmother, about her partial scholarship to Spelman, about having to leave school when her grandmother became ill. She spoke about the dreams she'd put on hold and the way music had sustained her through difficult times. Margaret listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions that demonstrated she understood the world Maya was describing. When Maya finished her story, Margaret was quiet for a moment, clearly processing what she'd heard. Margaret said finally, "I want to tell you who I am, and then I want to make you a proposition." Maya leaned forward, intrigued. "I'm the director of the Atlanta Young Artists Foundation. We provide scholarships, mentorship, and performance opportunities for talented young musicians who might not otherwise have access to professional training and career development." Maya's heart began to race, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. She'd been disappointed before by offers that seemed too good to be true. "Every year we select 5 exceptional artists for our full fellowship program," Margaret continued. "It includes a complete scholarship to finish your degree at any accredited music program in Georgia, plus a living stipend, private instruction with master musicians, and guaranteed performance opportunities with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra." Maya's mouth went dry. This was the kind of opportunity she dreamed about but never dared to hope for. "Is typically quite rigorous," Margaret said, "but after what I witnessed tonight, I'm prepared to offer you a fellowship here, tonight, based on what I witnessed. The only question is, are you ready to pursue your music seriously?" The restaurant suddenly felt very quiet around them. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. This was the moment dreams collided with destiny, the chance she'd been waiting for, the door that could lead her back to the path she'd been forced to abandon. Maya started, then stopped. The practical part of her mind was racing through calculations. She had bills to pay, responsibilities to her family. Could she really afford to take such a risk, even if it meant pursuing her dreams? "I can see you're thinking about the practical concerns," Margaret said gently. "Let me address those. The living stipend is designed to replace whatever income you're currently earning. You wouldn't be taking a financial step backward. If anything, you'd be more secure than you are now." Maya's hands were trembling. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you offer this to me, based on one performance?" Margaret smiled, and Maya could see decades of wisdom in her expression. "Because I've spent 30 years in this business, and I know real talent when I see it. But more than that, I know character when I see it. What you did tonight, the way you handled that man's disrespect, the way you transformed a moment of intended humiliation into something beautiful and powerful, that tells me everything I need to know about who you are as a person and as an artist." She leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. "Maya, the music world needs people like you. Not just talented musicians, but artists who understand that music can be a force for change, for healing, for bringing out the best in people. You didn't just play beautifully tonight, you reminded everyone in this room of their own humanity." Maya felt the dam of suppressed hopes finally cracking, tears threatening to spill. She felt her grandmother's spirit surrounding her, decades of sacrifice suddenly finding their purpose. She thought about the dreams she'd been carrying for so long, dreams that had felt increasingly distant with each passing month of serving tables and clearing plates. What would I need to do? Maya asked quietly. Margaret pulled a business card from her purse and wrote something on the back. Call me tomorrow, we'll set up a formal audition, just a formality really, and get the paperwork started. You could begin the program as early as next month. Maya took the card with shaking hands. Margaret Chen, Director, Atlanta Young Artists Foundation. On the back, she'd written her personal cell phone number. Margaret, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Margaret replied with a warm smile. Thank me in 5 years when you're performing at Carnegie Hall. The confidence in her voice made Maya's heart soar. This wasn't just charity or pity. This was a professional recognizing another professional, someone who saw in Maya not just talent but potential for greatness. As they stood to leave, Maya glanced back toward the piano that had changed her life. It sat silent now, waiting for the next person who might need its voice to tell their story. But Maya knew she would never forget this night, this moment when her whole future had shifted because she'd been brave enough to play. They walked toward the exit together, passing table 12, where Richard and his companions had finally finished their meal. Richard looked up as Maya passed, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw something there she hadn't expected. Not apology, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. His lips parted as if to speak, but pride sealed them shut, the last refuge of a defeated man. Maya didn't need his apology. She didn't need his approval or his respect. She had something far more valuable now. She had her future back. Outside the restaurant, Margaret gave Maya an unexpected hug. I'm so glad I was here tonight, she said. Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be. As Margaret's car pulled away, Maya stood alone on the sidewalk, looking back at the golden oak through the large windows. Inside, the last few diners were finishing their meals, servers were beginning their closing duties, and life was returning to normal. But Maya knew that nothing would ever be normal for her again. She pulled out her phone and called her mother, knowing she'd still be awake despite the late hour. Maya, honey, is everything okay? Mom, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. Everything is perfect. I need to tell you about tonight. As she walked to her car, Maya told her mother about Richard's racism, about being forced to play the piano, about the standing ovation and Margaret's offer. Her mother's tears flowed through the phone connection, 20 years of worry finally washing away, and Maya could hear the pride and relief in her voice. Your grandmother would be so proud, her mother said through her tears. She always said your music would take you places we could never imagine. Maya got into her car but didn't start it immediately. She sat in the parking lot of the Golden Oak, looking up at the stars that were barely visible through Atlanta's light pollution. She thought about the long journey that had led her to this moment, the struggles, the sacrifices, the dreams deferred but never abandoned. Tomorrow would mark the first day of the life her grandmother had envisioned but never lived to see. She would call Margaret and begin the process of reclaiming her future. She would finish her degree, study with master musicians, perform with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. She would become the artist she'd always known she could be. But tonight she wanted to savor this moment. The moment when a racist millionaire's attempt to humiliate her had instead become the catalyst for everything she'd ever wanted. As Maya finally started her car and pulled out of the parking lot, she thought about all the young Black women who were still sitting where she'd been just hours ago, talented, dreams deferred, serving people who didn't see their worth. She thought about the servers still inside the Golden Oak, the ones who'd watched her performance with tears in their eyes because they understood exactly what it meant. Maya carved a promise into her soul. When success came, and it would come, she would remember this night. She would remember what it felt like to be underestimated and dismissed. And she would use her success to create opportunities for others, to be the Margaret Chen for some other young person who just needed someone to believe in them. 6 months later, Maya Johnson would grace the stage of the Atlanta Music Conservatory to a standing ovation. 2 years after that, She would make her debut with the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, performing her original concerto Grandmother's Hands, the same melody that had once shattered prejudice in a restaurant. But the most satisfying moment would come 3 years later, when Maya founded Rising Notes, a scholarship program born from her own journey through prejudice to triumph for young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds. The first scholarship recipient would be a young Latina girl from East Atlanta whose talent had been dismissed by a music teacher who thought classical music wasn't for people like her. And sometimes, late at night when Maya was practicing in her beautiful new studio apartment, she would think about Richard Whitmore and wonder if shame had taught him what arrogance could not. She hoped he had, but even if he hadn't, it no longer mattered. His prejudice had been the unwitting key that unlocked her destiny. Maya had learned something crucial that night. Sometimes our greatest enemies become unwitting architects of our destiny, not because they intend to, but because their actions reveal your strength in ways you never knew existed. The piano at the Golden Oak stands sentinel in its corner of the restaurant, silent most nights but its strings still vibrating with the echo of the night. One woman's courage changed everything. And if you listen carefully, late at night when the restaurant is quiet, you might still hear the echo of her grandmother's hands guiding her across those keys, whispering the truth that changed everything. Music don't see color, baby girl. When you play, you speak a language everybody understands. What about you? What dreams are you carrying that others have told you aren't possible? What talents are you hiding because someone convinced you they weren't valuable? Maya's story reminds us that our greatest moments often come when we refuse to let others define our worth. Don't wait for your Richard Whitmore moment. Create your own stage, play your own song, and let the world hear who you really are. Your dreams are valid. Your talents matter. Your story demands to be heard. If Maya's journey inspired you, remember that every great artist started exactly where you are now, with a dream and the courage to pursue it despite what others might think. Subscribe for more stories of resilience, triumph, and the power of refusing to let anyone else write your story.